I find that we're way too much formatted by the major or the minor in terms of harmonization that talks to our psyche directly about anguish, hope, about different levels of subtle divisions between the emotions. Many shades, perhaps because there are at least three minors compared to one major. The harmonic, the melodic ascending and descending, and the latter two ones are really a combination of major and minor. Either the third is minor but the sixth is major, or then the third is major, the sixth is minor. And you have this bittersweet color, this nostalgic happiness, this feeling that is not fully sad nor fully happy, if it's to be so binary simplified. Of course, it's more sophisticated, more subtle, more full of innuendo, where you can delay one with a suspension, prepare the other one that gives you a sense of hope in the desperation. And composers use it mostly because it allows to have such amount of different layers of expression in the general sadness compared to the almost unequivocal major. When it's major, is shiny and clear and no shadows. The triton inevitably creating the tonalities tension release is perhaps, of course, not a shadow. It's also, in a way, that is also the rapport between dissonance and consonance that evolves through the eras of music we study, search, or about, or play, or pretend to understand, because in a way we are outside of their context. So starting all the way from the Gregorian, who avoided the triton, as they call him, the devil of music, because of the temptation in analogy, in the decision, necessity, objectivity, or subjectivity rather, to have the triton resolve, open or close, therefore creating a major or minor choice of a tonality in which it resolves itself. Whenever the perfect fifths, they don't need to be resolved since they are not in tension. Fine. All these things are good because we are aware of them when we deal with classical music at any level, because while customized through the centuries, all the composers used the same tools of expression of their emotions, of their thoughts, and of their narrative capacity, with or without lyrics. And in a way, without lyrics, it's clearer too. Why? Because inevitably the function of attention with the diminished seven that has two overlapping tritons is the ultimate tension, unsettled situation. And if you add it in syncopations, then you create a sense of agitation, not only of the body, but mostly of the soul. And so the unsettlement, that is the syncopation for the pulse, the unresolved tension for a chordal progression. But for the major and the minor, I think this is something a little more subtle, because when you have principal minor key pieces, Chopin concerto, Chopin sonata, he follows the rules of the Viennese Haydn sonata form, and sometimes he chooses to not follow them exactly. His intuition, or perhaps his youthfulness, brought him in the first E minor concerto to have the second theme in the relative major. So far you'll say that's what's supposed to be, except it's in the recap. When it's supposed to be tonicized, instead of this is in E major, but in the exposition. Now, that doesn't always strike the students who practice it, because it sounds very natural to be in E minor and then E major. But you have to take this in account in the colorization of the structure, of the construction of the piece. I would like to ask him why he did that. We could ask also Beethoven why the second theme of the Pathétique is in E flat minor rather than to have an inharmonic D sharp as a leading tone to this at least audacity striking then beginning surprise development in E minor for a C minor sonata. But are those the consequences that we can analyze from observing it? Or are those the motivations that he had in order to write it, not as expected in E flat major for the relative major second theme, but in E flat minor second theme, after his first theme is in C minor, even if he uses a lot of major thirds because of his theme being principally going to secondary dominant 5 of 4 in F minor. Well, F minor degree of C minor. Yeah, the chromaticism is something that is fascinating to Bach, fascinating for Beethoven, is fascinating for all composers. All semitones or most semitones, it creates a sense of non-belonging, at the same time is mostly attributed to minor than rather to major in comparison of cases I could give as an example. Even if theoretically it should be neutral since it's only semitones. The octotonic scale of the 20th century, early 20th century, is full of combinations of tone and semitones, and of course doesn't have a leading tone. So by essence, it's also untense, unreleased. Well, it has tritones, but they're not dealing with the leading tone. It's a question always of organizing in the modes the necessity to create a dissonance that expects desperately some resolution. In a syntax, if the verb is at the end or in the middle in the sentence, you also have a certain tension that is augmented if you wait for the result of the action, past, present, or future. And if you place it at the get-go, you don't really worry so much. So in a way, I think major and minor, yes, probably more in the romantic 19th century, in the European era where the emotions were expressed beyond the formal organization, like in the early Viennese Haydn school, where you had characteristic thematic materials that went in major and minor, and they had desperately clear contrasting personalities, just like leitmotifs in opera. But at the same time, the form prevailed and the tonality and the modality were a little secondary. I don't say they were not. In the Bach Prelude and Fugues, it's possible to play quite a few of them in the opposite mode, the major ones in minor and vice versa, and they don't sound that wrong. Of course they don't sound right, because we know they're written like Bach chose them to. But musically they hold up. The major doesn't necessarily express only this solar shining, and the minor the sorrow and the lament. And when it is, it's really meant with the semitones of the size of the lament, like F minor book 2. But okay, let's say that you can play a prelude like the second one, which is in C minor, but in C major. You hear the colorization is different, but fundamentally the driven, I would say, action prevails on the mood, but progressively through the galant style into the classical, after the Baroque into the romantic style, into the therefore mid-19th century, I think there you cannot imagine even replacing the minor tonality for a ballade by Chopin with a major. It doesn't work at all. It becomes laughable. And when the music is really program music, like the funeral march of his B-flat minor sonata, of course you cannot play it in major, other than the B section, which is meant to be remembrance of the deceased. But in the A section, it has to be in minor. But that is program music. In more pure music, you could say perhaps the mode of the mood, that's a good one, through the minor or the major chord, harmonically programs us to think in one mood or another, or to feel it, or to sense that this is the color, beautiful, meaningful choice of colors for a painter would be like a soundscape for a musician, within which we have even different colors for the tonalities in minor. For instance, Scriabin with an synesthesia combined them always with equivalence in colors. So the B flat minor and E flat minor and all the others should be the same if you observe the same steps and semi-steps organization in the tetrachords. But they don't sound the same even when they're exactly transposed because of the pitch, but also probably by the association of famous pieces in given keys, like C minor is always associated dramatically to the Beethoven's Fifth, to say the least. And people who have perfect pitch might agree with that, but perfect pitch is not necessarily the key to it all. It's helpful tool to fasten the speed between the ear and the neurons in the brain, and then eventually the fingers if the pianist. But in the alternative situation of relative pitch, is the intervals that matter, not the notes between the intervals specifically. That's discussed a lot by musicologists and researchers. But generally, we feel that without even knowing very clearly why and how. Minor sets us in a nostalgic, sad mood, or prepares us for a storytelling that will have some kind of that. And then because the top can be major or the bottom can be major in the alternative versions of minor tetrachords, then yes, you have this major and minor soundscapes, which have this subtle innuendo of a smile with a tear. I know it's cheesy, but I like to say it. You have the major in the third, the minor in the sixth. You could have the minor in the third, the major in the sixth. So you have the bottom tetrachord in minor, the top in major, or the bottom in major and the top in minor. Of course, the gap between 6 and 7 is more than a step, is a step and a half. That's chromatic, that's tone, and this is 3 semitones. So that gap brings us to avoid it melodically, because of the leading tone having to connect to the tonic, magnetically semitone, and therefore the 6th degree is an appoggiatura to the dominant. And then we call that harmonic minor. That's fully minor, because and the 3rd and the 6th are minor. And if the 3rd and the 6th are major, we are in major, or in minor, melodic, but in this case no more harmonic. And the melodic are the ones that are with the whole steps in the right top part. In which case the harmonization of minor corresponds also to the lament of the chaconne and the passacaille with the harmonic bass going from the tonic to the dominant, or chromatically. Like Dido's Death in Purcell's opera, or the Cantata number 12 by Bach, Weinen, Klagen, Sorgen, Sagen. So, and many other pieces that use this descent on which each harmony can be chromatized. And because you restart, it can go forever in loops, in variations, with delays and suspensions. And more chromaticisms to even tighten up more the mood. But the point is that it's either chromatic in minor, as the chromatic fantasy, ending by Bach, or Chopin's ending of the Barcarolle. Understood that there is such an incredible power in the suggestive power of the harmonization, which in a way enhances the appeal, the unforgettable attraction of the melodic note or group of notes, and that by themselves, like the Moonlight Song by Fauré. It's very striking, isn't it? How all of a sudden an alternative harmonization would have been good. It doesn't have to be with Alberti bass, but that's his harmonization, but you can do. This banality, or this expression of expectation of because of the generally expected harmonization, which degrees go with which with the relative. The beauty with the composers is that they don't always follow what we learned in the treatises, or we learn in the treatises in order to expect, perhaps not understand, but appreciate even more how the composers don't do what we expect them to do had they followed the rules. And sometimes it's a transgression, sometimes it's just an intuition. I don't think it was always meant to be an audacity per se, but perhaps there are cases by case situations. But it's true that if you play the first prelude in minor and the second in major, what if you play it with half minor? What prevails in the original conventional minor, or in a possible alternative major, is that yes, you get accustomed to this colorization, but I think fundamentally the drive and the mood remains the same. D minor, book 2. Perhaps it's a wrong opinion of mine to think that some of the Baroque music pieces, and not the ones that have really a charged emotional meaning, in a way they're automatically no more just pure music. For instance, the F sharp minor Pavane by Louis Couperin, expressing the morning, is impossible to be in major, even if it's Baroque. So it's not for all pieces, but I think that some pieces are more motoric or energy driven, or some of them are more interval driven. When you do for this F major invention, if you do the first symphony, sonata by Beethoven, could be also in the C minor sonata major, could be in minor. These examples are not just gimmicks. Don't please judge me for that, thinking at the surface I'm doing some kind of transvestizing the piece. It's composer's own choice, not only of which tonality, but also which mode, the modality. Of course, I'm well aware of that, but if I share with you these thoughts, is because I find that to some extent, in some cases, we are formatted by it because we know the one that it is. And if we were to discover a piece we didn't know in a given style, in another mode, we would probably accept it because it sounds plausible. Now, does that mean much to the quality of the interpretation of the way it's written and intended by the composer? Naturally. Well, yes, it does, because I think then you appreciate it even more, and you inject a meaning into it more than only playing it because it's on the score. And because of the first theme in the Pathétique, the major minor, because 5 or 4 in the way, in the secondary dominant. So second theme should be in E flat major, the relative. Again, without provocation, this could have sounded totally natural, to have a relaxed relative major second theme contrasting with the driven first one. And then, and then the beginning of the development, it's in E minor. Nobody expects in C minor principal key the development to start in E minor in that early Viennese school time. Nobody expects Haydn to do in one of his late sonatas E flat major, the second movement, in the flat 2 key of F flat major, but of course spelled E major. And he must have chosen it for the coloristic effect of the away from the expected. Then it would have been perhaps on the dominant. we don't expect, like Beethoven in the D major Sonata number 7, when he reinstates that introduction to go on the double bar end of the exposition to the development, doesn't even harmonize it, which is obviously the dominant of D major for the exposition, becoming the leading tone alone of the relative major B flat, but not. That's the great thing. He should have done. But as a leading tone to the real relative minor, which is B minor. So D major, B minor. But his development is D major, flat 6 in major. Flat 6 in major, Ludwig. Okay, let's say he had done the relative minor rather than the flat 6 in major. You still have a difference of colorization if you hear your development start in the relative minor, then in major. And then again, why is your second theme in minor when your first theme is in minor? So the audacities outside of the context of their time capsule escape us because we heard more dissonances, more chromaticism, quasi of not completely atonalism, serialism, post-everythingism. That was a fun one. But if we try to hear how they heard, immerse ourselves in the music that they heard around their time, in their area, in their time, this either provocative, either profoundly necessary, striking usages of major minor in different shades or ways or forms of surprise or escape. I think that they corresponded to a deep necessity in the composer's meaning. Was not just an effect for the case of it. I mean, okay, sake of the effect, you can do the opening of the fourth ballade. Suspended on the dominant in F major, you feel like you're in some kind of paradisic, I cannot even say it, paradise. When the piece starts, after the introduction, you have a semitone, and then a diminished third around the C dominant, but in A minor, in F minor. So what did I say, A minor? That was silly. Forgive me. Major ninth, sun shining, and this couldn't be more tortured minor with a altered third being diminished. So yes, it is a lament of the romanticism, and of course this cannot be in major. Perhaps none of them should be, and in any case they won't, because we play what we read, but we want also to observe and analyze and understand and perhaps second guess if we can or if we can't, why and how it came up for some composer to do what we don't expect, and why we like it. Is it because of the surprise effect? Is it because in the context of the time it was a first? Or is it because we like to compare and contrast, since we have access to so much more music of the past than they had music in their own past to play or to learn or to read, and a lifetime as well, shorter, I mean in average. But factually, I think that when they wrote their music, that's my perhaps guessing, is that they were very well schooled or learned quickly, intuitively or intellectually, the harmonic progressions. And then all these exercises and assignments. And when they composed, they learned to forget all they learned. In a way, the best assimilation is that what you learn remains in you because it shapes you, because you accept it. It's like politeness. It's something imposed, but then it becomes a second nature. And when you transgress, it's also because you wish to prove something or bring out a mood at a different level of expression. And I find that this makes the composer's thoughts, emotions, the ways they reach us, or reach the people of their own time, because I don't know that all of them imagined that we'll keep studying and playing them centuries after, outside of the context of the hearing of the everything, not to mention the instrument. But there's something fundamentally appealing to us to immerse ourselves in their harmonic, melodic, tonal, chromatic, altered musical language, which translates to us, besides the mood and the feeling, also without lyrics in the case of piano solo pieces, so much storytelling, which keeps on giving with life. It's a companionship with a piece that you keep thinking you know, it's so fine, but then you realize that you discover different ways of its manifesting to yourself when you play it. And you relive it, and you revisit it, and you rediscover it. Even simple bridges take a certain meaning, and not everything is understandable right away, even if it's defined in a lot of analytical research. It time to time, and then the layers of the awarenesses settle, and there is a sedimentation, and at some point you play the piece as if it's yours, not because you pretend, but because this appropriation brings you to hyphen the piece from its own era into your era. And in a way, yes, all what you learn you should forget in order to remain in you, and then you keep open for the new horizons that they bring to you every time you revisit them. French people say culture is what's left once you forgot everything else. Probably some kind of second nature. Acquired, but becomes intuitive. Pretentious to hope to reach the level of the intuition of the composers whom we play in their own inner hearing that resulted into this, striking, driven, emotional, profoundly meaningful human experience of their own emotions in music, of their own thoughts in music, of their own organization of thoughts in music. How lucky we are to be able to take the time to study them, discover them. It's a luxury. And at the same time we receive so much while we struggle to play it best, because the technical aspect of playing remains very difficult through life. Alas. As a child prodigy, I thought when I'll be old, it'll be all easy. That's the silliness of the child. But you know, the truth is that there is no artistry without technique, and therefore if you want to express what you feel through these harmonic progressions, you have to have the fingerings, the ergonomic organization of the way you shape the sounds to obtain it in this tempo, with this phrasing, on this instrument, with that resonance, with this pedaling, with this phrasing, with this direction of line, with this diction of the notes, with this innuendo about something that can be sad in the happiness or happiness in the sadness. There are so many ways that in fact you customize it while you play as authentically as possible the notes and the values which are indicated on the score, except that you bring it to life. And the way you bring it to life is in micro ways different from the other person who found some ways that it's more meaningful to them to bring out. And anyway it evolves through life. It's not frozen in, you know, or written in stone. It's evolving. The tempo, the phrasing, the traction, the expression, the mood, the legato, the quality, all these things depend of each other. They're not in like separate elements that you just take in and out or replace. It's a whole.